There's a mitzvah on the Jewish people to establish sovereignty over all land that is within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael.
Had to be a vote of the world's nations in which a majority would decide that there should be a Jewish state.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
There's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, but who says you should have a Jewish state? Maybe we shouldn't have a Jewish state until Mashiach comes.
This flag behind me is hung over the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Rav Shlomo Yosef Kahaneman wanted this flag hung on Yom HaAtzmaut. And perhaps, we are missing something entirely. We're going to take a look at clips from Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz talking about the significance of this day and what this means from a Torah perspective. And it's something very profound. Let's dive in.
Let's talk a little bit about the ideology. I've mentioned before, and you probably have learned, that there's a big machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban. Is there a mitzvah d'oraisa of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Is there a mitzvah min HaTorah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Now, let's start with the Ramban first, because the Ramban is more beferish. The Ramban says, min HaTorah, there's an actual mitzvah to live in the land of Israel. You may have a heter not to. The Ramban is also moder. There may be heterim not to. But we start off with the idea that there's a mitzvah, there's a chiyuv to live here. Where does the Torah say that? So the Ramban points out that this is in Parshas Masai, in the end of Sefer Bamidbar. V'rishtem osa v'shaftem ba, you shall inherit the land. Now, everybody knows that. I'm sure you've heard over the years. The Ramban's opinion is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah d'oraisa. But what's a little less known is that the Ramban subdivides Yishuv Eretz Yisrael into 4 components. It's not just living here. There are 4 chalokim in what is called Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Chalak number 1, this is quite amazing. There's a mitzvah on the Jewish people to establish sovereignty over all land that is within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael as described in the Torah. Okay, do you hear this again? There is a mitzvah, according to the Ramban, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael doesn't only mean living here. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah to establish sovereignty. Establish sovereignty means establish a state. I'll get to the Goren Ksubas in a moment. That's component number 1. Component number 2, the Ramban says that we are not to leave the land desolate and uninhabited, meaning even if you have sovereignty, you might just leave it, do nothing to it, but rather you have to develop it so that people can either live there or agriculturally developed or industrially developed or even aesthetically developed, whether it be parkland. You don't leave it in a state of shemama, desolation and abandonment, but you cultivate it so it serves the benefit of the Jews that live here. That's component number 2. Component number 3 is a psychological idea. This is the Ramban at the end of Sefer HaMitzvahs, that no matter where a Jew lives, the Jewish people are not allowed to have a homeland other than Eretz Yisrael. That's kind of a psychological meaning. Even if you're living in Gullus, you have to look at that as temporary. And the notion of a homeland has to be Eretz Yisrael. This is so fascinating because, as many of you might know, Theodor Herzl, at some point, the founder of modern political or secular Zionism. And again, I don't want to knock Herzl. Again, I want to make, it's an important point to recognize. Herzl was a person, he was absolutely not one who rebelled against the Torah. He didn't know anything. He had no Jewish education whatsoever. I don't think he was even circumcised. He knew nothing at all So if you talk about a proverbial tinok shenishba, he was as close to a tinok shenishba as one can imagine. So I'm not going to knock him as a Rasha because he didn't keep Shabbos or didn't believe in the mitzvahs. I think the one thing we can say positively is that despite the fact that he had no connection to Jewish teaching, he was a person who cared about the Jewish people, and this was his idea, to try to do something good for the Jewish people in the aftermath of the anti-Semitism that was poisoning Europe, especially as a result of the Dreyfus trial. That kind of influenced him a lot. Remember, Dreyfus was a French soldier who was framed fraudulently for different types of spying, and many people in the world saw this whole trial as a fake trial that highlighted the poisonous anti-Semitism that existed in Europe. And Herzl developed an idea which we reject. But Herzl rejected an idea that the reason why people hate Jews is because they're so different than everybody else. They don't have a state, they don't have a government. If we have our own state, we have our own government, then we will be respected by the nations of the world. And then anti-Semitism will go away. So Herzl saw Jewish statehood as equaling normalization. Normalization would mean that anti-Semitism would go away. Now, Lamaisa, I think all of us know that even from a secular perspective, Herzl's idea, it was simply didn't work. If you ask yourself this question, this is a very emotionally difficult question to ask. Has the establishment of the State of Israel reduced anti-Semitism in the world or increased it? It probably increased it. And again, this is what the Navi Yechezkel said thousands of years ago, that when a Jewish person says, I want to be like all of the Goyim, and then I will be accepted, the nations will come back and remind you that no matter how much you want to be like them, they won't let you do it. In fact, in many ways, anti-Semitism is one of the tools Hashem uses to make Jewish people know that we have to be different. It's a very tragic way of having to discover that. But be it as it may, I don't want to impugn Herzl's motivations. Now, because Herzl didn't have a special attachment to Eretz Yisrael or to Torah, so Herzl was willing to accept any type of land as a place for a Jewish state. He just wanted Jews to have a country. So as a result, Herzl at some point, because it was very difficult to get, because at that time, Palestine was under the control of the Ottoman Empire out of Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire didn't want a lot of Jews. I mean, there were Jews here already, but he didn't want a large-scale number of Jews coming in. So Herzl at some point was toying with Uganda to be the Jewish home. And what's interesting is the Ramban had Ruach HaKodesh. The Ramban says, no, Jews are not allowed to make any other state their home other than Eretz Yisrael. So I mentioned three components of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. One is Jewish sovereignty over the land. Number two, that the land should be not desolate, it should be beautified and cultivated. Number three, Eretz Yisrael has to be the homeland, the Jewish national home. Number four is the final one, that I myself should live here unless I have a hedger. So the point is, that's most important, is some people will tell you, well, yeah, there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, but who says you should have a Jewish state? Maybe we shouldn't have a Jewish state until Mashiach comes. Well, it's very clear that the Ramban rejects that idea, because the Ramban says that the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is not only a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel, but there's a mitzvah to establish a Jewish state. Now, we have to be honest. The Ramban is not addressing what is the status of a non-religious state or a state that has Arabs and Jews, in governments. That's very true. But l'chol hapachas, according to the Ramban, the establishment of a Jewish state is considered to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's an important point that a lot of people don't pick up on, because everybody thinks the Ramban just says Yishuv Eretz Yisrael means there's a mitzvah to live here. And if I live here under Arab rule or Palestinian rule, as some people in a fantasy world believe is possible, I mean, frankly, it is delusional. The compassion we have to have for Neturei Karta is that they're just crazy. Because the idea that somehow, if somebody's not responsible for being a lunatic, but somehow the idea that if we give over the land to the Palestinians, we will have, beautiful peace, and we'll have all our yeshivos and all of our shuls and all of our learning, makes no sense at all. But besides the fact that it makes no sense, it would also not be a fullness of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which the Ramban says is part of it is to have a shalita of Am Yisrael over the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. By the way, the biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael are much larger than the state of Israel. Now it's interesting. On one hand, you have a lot. A lot is part of the state of Israel, and it may not be part of Eretz Yisrael. That's why some people say in a lot, you got to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. So there is part of the state of Israel that's outside of Eretz Yisrael, but there's also large parts of Eretz Yisrael that are not in the boundaries of the state of Israel, right? Parts of Lebanon, even parts of Syria, and the like. Now, let me point out this idea that Jewish statehood is something to celebrate also emerges not only from Ramban, but even from Rambam, who doesn't say there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. But the Rambam discusses why we say Hallel on Hanukkah. Now, if we were to ask any of us, why do we say Hallel on Hanukkah? Most of us would think about the miracle of the candles burning for 8 days, or even the miracle of defeating the Greeks so that we could keep the Torah. That's what we would commonly say, because the Greeks were stopping us from keeping the Torah. But you know what the Rambam says? The Rambam says a remarkably Zionist statement. The Rambam says the simcha of Hanukkah was that Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael was restored. Wow. So the Rambam is saying the restoration of Jewish sovereignty. In fact, if you want a makor for saying Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, that would actually be a makor, except for the Gemara in Megillah that says we were still in sakana. Right? Hanukkah was the end of a war. Yom Ha'atzmaut is the beginning of a war.
We do say Hallel on Hanukkah.
We do a full Hallel. Now keep in mind that the Hasmonean kings were not tzaddikim. Many of them were non-religious, and many of them were persecutors of the Chachamim. And even so, the Rambam says, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty was a reason for celebration. So, you'll notice one thing. I did not mention anything yet. I'll mention it in a few minutes, about this being the footsteps of Mashiach, this being the beginning of Geula. You don't have to go there yet. As you know, in the prayer that was composed for Medinat Yisrael, that perhaps in some of your home shuls were said, there is a phrase that's a very controversial phrase, that the establishment of the state of Israel is described as Reishis Semichas Gulaseinu, the beginning of the flowering of redemption, the beginning of redemption, the beginning of the messianic process. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but everything I've said until now has nothing to do with that. It's not a question of part of Mashiach, it's not a question of Geula. It's simply an idea that the establishment of Jewish rule over Eretz Yisrael is, according to the Ramban, a fulfillment of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And according to the Rambam, although he does not have Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as a mitzvah, it is a source of rejoicing, because that is the basis of Hanukkah. Okay, this is not yet a messianic perspective. This is simply looking at the idea that Baruch Hashem, the Jewish people have established a sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael. Now, obviously, there's many issues that we have with the Medinas Yisrael, legitimately so. The government as a whole, is non-religious. Israel is officially a secular state. Like, what do they call it? They call it a Jewish-democratic state. A Jewish democratic state. Israel is a schizophrenic state. Because how can you be totally democratic if you're Jewish at the same time? In fact, a professor once said, somebody asked him, what is it? Is it a Jewish state? Is it a democratic state? And he said the most important part of the description is the dash in between the two words. It's a schizophrenic state. And therefore we have a lot of disagreements. We have disagreements regarding the army, military service. We have disagreements regarding the standards of modesty, regarding the Chilul Shabbos. And these are things that we argue about and we try to change and we try to negotiate. But sometimes what happens is that in the heat of arguments, you get so blinded by individual trees that you don't see an overall forest. And one has to understand, and this is really, I think, a basic orientation to the state of Israel, that we have to be very grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what happened in 1948. Remember, 1948 was only 3 years after the end of World War II. The Holocaust kind of lasted for 12 years, from 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, to 1945. Back this month, April 1945, Hitler, committed suicide, and the war ended shortly thereafter. 6 million Jews died, 1.5 million children. Gedolim, Kedoshim, yeshivas were wiped out. The world was desolate. The world was dark. We have not recovered, really, to this day. To this day, we have not really recovered. And only 3 years later, there was a momentary window where the world had mercy on the Jewish people. Quickly ended, but no, right after the Holocaust, there was a particular tiny little window. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed the Jewish people to come back after thousands of years, almost 2,000 years. And if you look at what has been built here in the 72 years or so since then, an infrastructure, the Gashmias is amazing. More importantly, if you look at the Ruchnias, look at the yeshivas, look at the Torah learning, look at the Shmiras HaMitzvahs, look at how much the so-called secular government helps yeshivas. You'd be a little shocked. Now granted, some people like Brisk, and after you have to respect Brisk for their consistency, they will not take a dime or a shekel from the government, because they say when you take government money, you're subject to government control. And you have to respect that view. They take a shita that they will not take government money, but most of us are a little more lenient than that. So the government is a great supporter of Torah. Yeah, there's a lot of strings attached, and there's machloksim and fights, etc. But you can't allow the individual issues that we grapple with to obscure the growth of Torah, the growth of Ruchnias, the ability of Jews to come, the ability of Jews to keep mitzvahs, to live with the protection, all coming from Hashem, but with an army and with a police force that are the human shluchim that protect us from enemies that would try to destroy us. Right across the street, there are people that would be happy to slit your neck if they'd have the opportunity. So, not to be a makir tov, not to be a person with gratitude, is a very repulsive and disgusting midah. The very name for a Jew is Yehudi, and I mentioned before, many times I've already mentioned, Yehudi means to be grateful. Leah called her fourth son Yehuda because she said, I am grateful to Hashem because he has given me more than I'm entitled. Because she knew there are 4 wives and 12 tribes, so she figured every wife gets 3 kids. When she got number 4, she got more than she deserved. That's gratitude. Says the Sfas Emes, a Jew is called a Yehudi because we have to go through life feeling Hashem has given us more chesed than we deserve. So, a Jew is many things, but the very definition of a Yehudi is one who is grateful. So, how can you look at Eretz Yisrael and not be grateful for the gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us? And how can you look at Eretz Yisrael and not be grateful even for what the Israeli government has given? For police, for fire, for infrastructure, for people who collect the garbage, for chayolim. Yeah, by and large, the Torah world is not in favor of compulsory drafting of yeshiva boys, taking them out of the Beis HaMedrash, because without Torah, there's no nitzachon. So we fight about that, we argue about that. But does that mean you shouldn't be grateful to what soldiers are doing? Right? How do you explain a soldier who even is from, who comes to daven mincha, that somebody spits on him? Can that be explained? Can that be justified? No, it cannot be. So, I think, whether you celebrate today or not today makes no difference. A day is a day. There's nothing magical in this day. This day is not a Yom Tov from Chazal. Makes no difference. The particular day is actually not important. But I think it is a time, at least, when you can reflect on a certain attitude that you have towards Eretz Yisrael, number one, which is independent of statehood, towards Medinas Yisrael, towards the people who create an infrastructure that allows the Torah community to flourish and to grow and to be matzliach. So it provides both the ability to grow spiritually and to be physically protected and the like. And then to have a feeling of hakaras hatov. This is really what the Panovich Rav was about. This is why the Panovich Rav flew the flag on Yom Ha'atzmaut. He says we have to be grateful. And when we stop being grateful, we're losing part of what it means to be a Jew. To be a Yid, Yehudi, is to say Natalti Yeser El Chelki. Okay, so that's, whether you say Hallel, don't say Hallel, with a bracha, without a bracha, or you shouldn't say it with a bracha, either way, whether you say Tachanan, don't say Tachanan, these are technicalities. These are minor things. But whether I should be Makir Tov to what soldiers are doing, to what police are doing, to what firemen are doing, to what garbage people are doing, that's not disputable. There has to be hakaras hatov. When there's not hakaras hatov, there is something sick in our personalities. Our personalities are not expressing what Judaism is about.
I've lived in Eretz Yisrael for over 30 years. And there was a time that you wouldn't find a flag in my house. And that was because I, too, was under the impression that, and rightfully so, that this holiday was set up at a time that shouldn't be set up for holidays, not between the new month of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. It shouldn't be set up holidays. We definitely shouldn't have live music, and all the arguments against the flag. But there's something that is very different about the current status of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. And that is very simple. That when we hit 50%, the Shekhinah has returned to Eretz Yisrael with the Jewish people. Hashem says that when we go into Galus, He's going to go into Galus with us. But when we return to the land, He will come and be with the Jewish people in the land. This year, Yom Ha'atzmaut will be celebrated throughout Israel. And yes, we don't understand the ways of Hashem. Furthermore, the book of Ezra tells us of the 42,360, I believe, people who came back, who primarily weren't the religious people. In fact, 113 of them were intermarried. But yet, they were allowed in, and they became the ones who helped build the Beis HaMikdash. You see, we don't know what the Galus has done to Klal Yisrael. When you see an irreligious person, when you see a person who has strayed away from the path, don't think for a second that he is just one person. He is a result of the exile. The very exile God is removing us from. If there was ever a scenario that the Jews would have an easier time to come to the land, it would be today. Think back 200 years ago. You get an interview with God, and God asks you, how could I bring the Jewish people back? And you say, perhaps you should make these machines that travel at high speeds through the air and carry them in cabins, and make a state that will be built up and ready for the Jewish people to inhabit. Even if we say admittingly that there were many irreligious people, they are only the result of the exile. And yet, God, Hashem, has gifted these people, these messengers, for whatever reasons, to come to Eretz Yisrael and build up the land. In fact, the king of Omri, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Talmud in Sanhedrin asks, this king was a bad king. Vayas hara be'enei Hashem, he did many bad things in God's eyes. But yet, the Talmud asks, why was he worthy of having 3 generations from his family being kings? And the Talmud says because he built up a place called the Shomron. You might ask, did he bring the Shomron? Did he build the Shomron so it should be a place for Torah? No, my friends. He did this for Avodah Zarah, for idol worship. But yet, we see that Hashem has many messengers. Hashem has many messengers who do his work. Politicians and people who work throughout the country. Each one of us are doing a different part of Hashem's mission. If you are religious and you're watching this, you were gifted a perspective of a religious person. You see, Hashem wants all the Jews to return, and he could very easily return everybody to God. God could do that. But he said, I'm going to make 2 teams. Let's call one team Yehuda, and we'll call the other team Yosef. And Yosef and Yehuda are living on 2 sides of the world. One of them is immersed in Torah, and one of them has returned to the land, but is immersed in building up the land. Rav Yaakov Emden, in his introduction to the Siddur HaYavitz, called Sulam Beit El, says the following. Don't think for a second that there's Torah outside of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the Torah can only be fulfilled in Eretz Yisrael. And furthermore, one may argue that I could learn Torah in Chutz La'aretz. I have good yeshivas learning Torah in Chutz La'aretz. He says the Torah of outside of the land is not Torah. It does not last. And that's why Avira de Eretz Yisrael is machkim. The ear inside of Eretz Yisrael makes one smart. Rav Zera fasted 100 times that he should forget the Torah that he learnt outside. But why? What's so special about Eretz Yisrael? So Rav Yaakov Emden says it's very simple. The Torah in Chutz La'aretz is fake. It's fake Torah because you are not following what the Torah says. The entire book of the Torah, like Rav Michal Weichbrod, I call him a Rav because he's taught me what I already know. And every Jew knows this, that they belong in Eretz Yisrael. The entire Torah is just the book of the Jews leaving Mitzrayim. I heard Rav Breitowitz say this. Just leaving Mitzrayim. That's our whole job, is coming to Eretz Yisrael. We've never fully left Mitzrayim. And now, the Torah in Eretz Yisrael is greater than the Torah in Chutz La'aretz. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. The Torah is flowing out of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the giants, like Yishai Fleischer, had him on, and he said to me, Aaron, stop saying, where are the religious Jews? The religious Jews are in Israel. Those are the religious Jews. You see, in Chutz La'aretz, you're acting religious, but you're not part of the heart of the Jewish people. The heart of the Jewish people, my friends, is in Jerusalem. The Shekhinah is with the heart of the Jewish people. The giants of Torah are in Eretz Yisrael, where you can walk the streets and speak to any person you meet. I pick up hitchhikers all the time, and I always ask them, what are you learning? And the whole way we talk Torah. This is Eretz Yisrael. Ashreinu. What a gift. When we go up to Shemayim, Hashem asks us, Tzipisa Yeshua. Do you think when you say, yeah, I waited for Mashiach. I waited every single day. Hashem is going to look at you and smile and say, you waited every day? What were you waiting for? I was waiting for Mashiach to come. So what did you do? I learned Torah. I davened for Mashiach to come. Did you read the Sefer? Did you read the Chumash? Did you read the Navi? Do you understand that the Chet HaMeraglim was done by the leaders of Klal Yisrael? The great Nesiim, who if they had come to Eretz Yisrael would lose their position and would be given over to the Kohanim. And these great rabbis said, I'd rather have my position than come to Eretz Yisrael. That's the message of the Torah. There is no other message. We can't really understand the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. But Eretz Yisrael is a living, breathing person. And she cries. And she says, where are my children? V'taymer Tzion, azavani Hashem. Tzion cries out and says, God has forsaken me. Says the Malbim, this is after half the Jews return. And that's what we're witnessing today. The war with Iran is clear. We don't hate Jews. We don't want Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Rashi says, if somebody comes and says that you stole the land, tell them that God told us to. The job of every Jew is to expel the 7 nations inside of the land. You might say, well, expel? Well, yes. There is a concept of ger toshav. If they want to follow the Noahide laws, it's a question if they're already here, if they need to be expelled. But yes. But why? Why, Hashem, couldn't you give us Uganda? Why did you give us this land? You understand that the holiness of the land, says the Sfas Emes, is essentially the Or Haganuz, the hidden light that left Adam when he sinned. That light went up to Shamayim, went on top of the Goren, the field of Arnon HaYavusi, the Yavusi. it stood there with its sword up in the sky, like prophets say in Divrei Hayamim and in Shmuel. V'char bei shlufa, v'ta'atzar magefa, and the sin stopped. What was the sin for? The sin was for sphira, for counting. Counting the Jewish people brings a bad omen. It's ayin hara, to count. The Torah says that it brings magefa, that you shouldn't count the people. But David HaMelech wanted the Jews to sin. He doesn't know why. We first should try to figure out why. The Ramban says very simple. The shichnoi tidrishu is a mitzvah daraisa, to seek out the Makam HaMikdash, to seek out the place where we could build a resting place for Hashem. What are we doing? Are we praying to Hashem that Hashem should do the work? Is that what we're doing? We're saying, Hashem, please build the Beis HaMikdash. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Rashi, but you didn't see the Zohar. And that Rashi is in the Havamina of the Gemara. Regardless, the Beis HaMikdash is built under the spiritual Beis HaMikdash. There's a machlokes Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, if this world reflects the next world, or the next world reflects this world. The Zohar says that the third Beis HaMikdash that Rashi is referring to, Kivyochel, is the Beis HaMikdash that falls down from Shamayim. That one is in Slabish on the Beis HaMikdash that's down on over here. That one we built. That's why if you look in Yecheskel, Membeis, it describes this Beis HaMikdash. It tells us where everything is. It tells us the dimensions. It's huge. I'm actually working on a 3D book on it. We have it in publishing now. We're working on publishing this book. My father is doing it primarily. But we have all the plans. It's going to be out. Be'ezrat Hashem. Leave a comment if you want to hear more about that. But are we preparing physically? You see, if we don't break this now, if we don't break this attitude, this separation of Zionism and Zion, separate them. Forget everything you heard about the flag. And start understanding. I feel like I'm giving a schmooze, but I really believe this. If we all just start understanding that Hashem gave every person, every one of us, a tafkid, a purpose. And if you're in Eretz Yisrael, your purpose is different than if you're in Chutz La'aretz. And we have this gift that we're able to talk to each other. If you're listening to this in Chutz La'aretz, let me know where you are. Tell me. We have to do the work. There were 4 kings, David, Asa, Yehoshaphat, and Chizkiyahu. These 4 kings, the Medrash says, David said, Erdoif oivai v'asigem, let me chase after my enemies and catch up to them and slaughter them. Asa just said, Erdoif oivai, let me just chase them. And Hashem, you do the work. Yehoshaphat, he took the guitar and he started strumming and singing and dancing, and his enemies fell. And Chizkiyahu laid in bed. And Hashem wanted Chizkiyahu to say shir. He wanted him to give praise. In fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Ratzu lasu Chizkiyahu Mashiach v'sancherev goygu magog. They wanted to make him Mashiach. But why? Why wasn't he answered? Because he didn't say halal. He didn't say praise. Yes, I've changed. I don't make a bracha for technical reasons. But do I say halal? So, thank you for joining me. Please like, share, and subscribe. Give me your thoughts. Tell me where you feel. If this resonates with you, if you want to hear more content like this, and hopefully we'll be doing another one another show on this topic before Yom Yerushalayim, which will be much more in depth. And we really need to wake up, all of us, myself included, to the miracles happening right now. The kibbutz golius that has happened. It's no longer a question of how it will happen. It has happened. We have returned. The Jewish people, the heart, the soul are in the land. The land is rebuilt, and we are just waiting for the last remnants to join us. And as Michal Weichbrod says, Chazak v'amatz. Shalom from just outside Jerusalem.